Welcome to the 2020 series presented by the New York Film Academy. The 2020 series are conversations with creative visionaries about craft, creativity, and collaboration. And we will have 20 minutes of shop talk and then 20 minutes of answering questions from you guys, the global audience. So please write in. We'd love to hear from you. I am Liz Hinlein. I am creative director and a filmmaker at New York Film Academy. And I am so grateful to have such a brilliant filmmaker with us today, Trish Dalton, who's going to talk all things creativity, documentary, and narrative. Hello, Miss Trish. Look, you made it. It always makes me really excited when people actually show up. Like, oh, phew, here we go into Zoom land. I really was so moved by your student athlete film. I really felt like that is an important piece of work. And I want to sort of start at the end where didn't that do something like in the actual world? It had some impact.
Well, yeah, I'd like to think so. I think it was an issue that was important that when we set out, myself and the other filmmakers involved, set out to make the film, our intention was to shed a light on an issue that we thought was unfair for a lot of the current college athletes. And now their laws have changed in the last few years to offer them more rights, like the name, image, and likeness rights. So they have rights to their own name, image, and likeness. And that, I think, has afforded them some more opportunities that weren't there prior. And I think the conversation is still ongoing. There's a lot to still be done, but I hope the film helped to raise awareness and help to move the legislation forward.
And do you think that's like the high point of what like entertainment or media can do, that it actually can change sort of like real world events?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think entertainment does so many things for helping people navigate life and their feelings and their emotions, like all art, whether that's a painting or music or a film, if it kind of can help you connect to your own experience or understand it or whatever that is, I think it's all important. Personally, one of the reasons I got into documentary is because I felt like if you took something that whether that like any kind of injustice and put it out to a wide audience, like through film. And when I saw documentaries that did that when I was growing up, I thought that feels effective and not, sounds like that could easily just sound like propaganda. But it really, for me, was about just putting a light into places that were shadowed or dark and allowing them to be looked at. Because I feel like as a society, when we look at things, we can talk about them, and I feel like then it allows us to correct injustices.
So when you're making or choosing like a project that you want to make, because I always think that when you're as a creative and artist, especially a filmmaker, like a lot of you is on the screen, because you're making the choice. It has to be you because you're making choices from your point of view and your personality, even if it's nothing about you in your life. So with that project, what was it in you that either your questions you're trying to answer by making it, or like why that project?
That project came to me through Charmin Abad-Chenoy, who's a good friend of mine, fellow documentarian, and her and I had known one another for a long time, and we had connected through covering war and conflict zones in the Middle East. And we had talked about collaborating for a long time. And a lot of the times, like, she would call me and say, hey, there's a Kalashnikov factory that I think we can get into in northern Pakistan. Let's film that, like how easy it is to put together a Kalashnikov. And when she called me about this, it was really left field because a lot of our projects were abroad and international. But it was right up both of our alleys because both of us were really interested in looking and pointing our cameras and pointing a light on situations that we felt like were important. If people saw them, we could potentially help the people who were being harmed. And so this quickly, we started researching it. Somebody had come to her with the concept, Steve Stout, and he said, if you want to cover human rights in America, you should look at college sports because it's very unjust. And it didn't take very much research for us to realize that did seem to be the case. So I think for me, I always have to look at a story that I'm going to work on, because as you know, as a fellow filmmaker, you really have to really feel your heart in it, because it's going to be a lot of time and energy, especially when you're fundraising to find the funding, and you're doing a lot of the hustling as you're making the film. And my heart went out to these athletes right away. Their stories were heartbreaking, and I just felt like it was something that I could feel passionate about very easily.
Okay, that's a great setup. With that, Charlie, will you play the trailer, please?
Don't even worry about getting the education. Just do what you need to do on the field.
So many kids get it sugar-coated. Because everybody's telling them they're the best player in the world.
You send young kids on a roller coaster. You recruit them, you bring them in. As soon as we sign, you switch up and you're here for a job. But then you don't pay me.
What's at stake for a university if a player makes money off their own likeness? The coaches are making millions coaching players whose families live below the poverty line.
I thought I would be playing professionally right now. I never would have expected to be here.
They're propelling a billion-dollar industry, getting a sweatsuit for it.
Yay. You know what? I also really vibed with all your music choices that were really powerful and very timeless in their way. And I was curious, was there a methodology with that?
Well, our composer, Kari Mateen, he's based in California, and he's excellent. And he composed that, and actually he has this sort of like home studio in his garage in Culver City, and him and I would hang out, and sometimes he let me. I actually think I have like a small vocal in one of them, but no, he was great, and yeah, I'm glad that you like the soundtrack. That was all him.
It's really, really good and very impactful. So we talked about, when we were talking earlier, like one of the things that people don't like, it's wonderful to see the end product and see HBO and all the sort of bells and whistles with that. But there's a whole thing called the development process that is mainly the life, like the growth period. It's like the being at home with a kid period before they go out to college, which is a lot of the years. And when, maybe not with that project, but typically, where do you start in, like, are you creating ideas and pitching? Are you receiving ideas and seeing what you can do with them? Just sort of give me your pathway.
Yeah, I would say whether I come across the idea because someone approaches me, or I think this happens a lot where friends will say, "Hey, Trish, I'm doing this thing," or "Have you heard about this thing?" Or, you know, and they think this might be an interesting documentary. And sometimes that's the thing. Like I'll just think, "Oh, wow, let me look at that," or "Let me go see." And then I kind of see, am I hooked? Am I into it? Do I agree? Do I want to try it? And so I've fallen into projects just by like things that I'll hear about, or friends suggesting a topic or something that they're really into, you know. And then I think about, yeah, actually, I just had one of those calls earlier today. A friend called me up with a concept that that was interesting, and I was interested to hear it. I think I'm always open. I don't always have the bandwidth, of course, to do every project, but I like hearing ideas. And from there, I think about, is it something that I could raise money for, and what would that look like? And sometimes I really have no idea, and other times I think of people who might be interested and why. And I think even if I don't have a clear idea of where the money will come from or how it will happen, like, which is true of probably every film, including Student Athlete, I think I have to feel like, okay, this will find a home, or it will find support through investors or through, there are people that want to see this film made, whether or not, that's a broadcaster or an individual or an organization, or, I think, like I said, if I feel the film is just going to be a good enough story and something that I will want to commit to, then I think then the film funding is always kind of a mystery, but I have some ideas, I guess, of how I'll manage that.
And do you put a bunch of research up front to see, is this even worth X amount of time, or the reach? Like, how do you sort of partition yourself for a time period figuring that out?
Yeah. I'll kind of flush out an idea on paper, maybe like a 2-pager. And then I kind of call it spitballing. I might spitball some ideas to a few producer type friends. Hey, what do you think about this? Where do you think, can we do this? And sometimes, I think this is probably true for you in the narrative world as well, because I do some narrative, but more your world. But I think I like to talk out my ideas, and sometimes just talking about them with friends or other producers, or what do you think? And it helps me even gel what I'm saying, or what the story is, or how I'm going to tell it. And it's before I can really get that solid, it's helpful for me to bounce it off and talk about it. So I do that. And because sometimes I might get a bunch of no's on a concept, and then I think, could I be reframing that, or is there, I mean, Student Athlete, we got a lot of no's because a lot of people were concerned about challenging the NCAA, and we were concerned about that too, to a degree of is anybody going to get broadcast this?
Right.
And it took us a lot to get there. We didn't have a plan of how that was going to work, and we took the risk anyways.
And so, so the other, so the evils of filmmaking is sometimes this sort of kicking your butt, well, I guess I could put some my own money in it, to get it going. And have you done that, or have you done the Kickstarter-y, that sort of bootstrappy thing?
Yeah, I feel like I fundraised every possible way. I feel like I think, especially because I feel like the world of how you sell films is constantly changing, especially in the last 20 years that I've been doing this. It used to be maybe maybe there was more grants from the state, or maybe there was more money up front from broadcasters when I was starting out. And then that changed to the more crowdfunding model and the investor model. And so I've kind of run the gamut. And I would say I've between getting grants from the state or from organizations, and then bringing on individual investors, and then partnering with broadcasters all across. Sorry, was that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it totally does. But it also says that you try not to put in your own cash.
Oh, right. Do I spend my own money? I still spend a lot of my own money. And I think the way that I finished my first feature, because shorts were a little bit easier. I definitely self-funded shorts, and even last year I self-funded a short. But because sometimes it's just, for me, I feel like the amount of time and energy that goes into fundraising, I feel like it's just as easy to just spend that money if it's not too crazy. Like a full feature is a little too crazy.
Yes.
But short is something that, and I'm not advocating for that model or suggesting that that's smart, but I've definitely done it a lot of times. And I think meaning I'll have a job and then I'll pay for making a short, right, quote unquote, on the side. Features are trickier. And I really think it kind of takes a giant commitment, for features, where you have to say I'm going to stop working and do everything possible, including live under a bridge, to finish this film. And I feel like it kind of comes to that level of doing whatever it takes regularly in filmmaking. because even if you have funding, or you have half of your funding, you right, still there's this giant thing. A friend of mine was finishing a film that's doing very well and has funding, and you know, she was like, oh, I just need, you know, $40,000 by the end of the week, and she had to figure out how. I mean, in order to raise any money even in a short amount of time, you kind of have to just be like, I'm going to find that money in some magical way. And I think, yeah, it just, for me, it just took dedication, like in deciding, okay, like this is going to happen. And not saying that it's always successful or that it's always, you know, definitely not always, it's generally challenging, but I think that's the attitude required.
Well, it's a little bit do or die. And I guess at some point it is either you've put too much time or too much money already. So it's either you got to keep going, like you're already in the Venus flytrap, or, you know, you can't really backtrack.
Right. I think there's times where, and I think that this is not unusual for filmmakers, where you might be trying to raise money for a couple of years or maybe longer, and you're like, you keep working on your film, but you're a little bit at a standstill because you really need this chunk of money. And so sometimes that takes, and also sometimes you're doing other things with your life, like working or taking care of a family or whatever. And so it's like this ebb and flow of like how much time you can really commit to fundraising and finishing the film. And yeah, but I think it always requires a certain amount of dedication.
The do or die. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm just curious, and this is more in a production craft way, what is your prep like, if you have a normal prep for a documentary project as opposed to, say, a narrative project?
I think it's easier, and this might just be mentally, but I think it's easier to start for me a documentary project without money or with less money. Are not worried so much about how you're going to finish it. Whereas with the narrative, you have to know that you have enough money to do for production. And then like, you really kind of want to know that you have a plan for post, you know? So I think that's been my holdup from doing a narrative feature, because that is like just overwhelming to raise all of the money, or even like just half of the money up front. With a documentary, you can kind of fundraise as you go, because you start filming, and then you can kind of edit something and pitch that, or film a little bit more. And so it feels a little more manageable without funding, or with less funding to do a documentary. So my approach, I think, yeah, that's the difference.
No, that's totally, and it is, well, what's fulfilling about the documentary, and I'm just delving into that, is that you're actually making something. Whereas sometimes after the script, you're not making something. You're doing things, you're having casting, you're doing locations, whatever you're doing, but you might not be just by yourself, but still it doesn't feel as tactile. Right.
You have to just rewrite, pitch it. Yeah. That's why I self-funded my narrative short right before COVID, just because I was like, this is really hard. I mean, it had been a few years of pitching the script, and it was a short, and like, I just thought, you know, I'm gonna just try this.
100%. We have a couple questions here. One is from Ison. Hopefully I didn't bastardize your name. I would love to ask Trish when she decided to become a filmmaker, and I would love to know that.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think it was when I was in high school, like I talked about being inspired by documentary filmmakers that I felt like were helping to bring issues that I felt like were important to the forefront and to a general public. And I saw that those could make impacts, like Michael Moore. And that was when I decided that I wanted to do documentary. And I think I always loved theater and film, like even as a little kid, like when I was 9, I was writing my own plays and putting my siblings and my neighbors and my friends into these little roles. I'd write these plays and have them act them out. And when my parents got a video camera, I became like a little bit obsessed with filming all of our family adventures. So I think I like both the idea of putting on a show and also the sort of political impacts that and sort of social justice impacts that documentary could have.
And where there's besides Michael Moore, were there other filmmakers that you were like inspired by?
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, I was pretty obsessed with independent film and documentary and narrative, and I can't, oh my goodness, like Jane Campion, and I think like so many, I feel like I don't want to restrict myself, and I shouldn't restrict myself to Michael Moore either. I think just like his political motivation was, I shared that, but not necessarily his style. And I think like women filmmakers in particular, I mean, I liked Czech New Wave. I liked Vera Trigalova. I liked things that were showing like feeling and using styles that you didn't see in mainstream movies also. And I think that inspired me to have, I didn't feel like you saw so many women's stories. Like they were still kind of in the niche kind of indie film world. And like, I loved Go Fish, you know, I loved, you know, it was like that, those films inspired me.
And do you like bring on, do you, because it's such a like a lonely thing at times being a filmmaker, because it's you yourself, or you in the project basically. So do you bring, like, do you look for collaborators, or how does that is that something that pulls you more into a project to have a collaboration?
Yeah, definitely. I like to have a producing or directing partner out of the gate, because it can help. And sometimes I think you know, always having collaborations of, you know, it's collaborator with your director of photography, with your editor, with your, you know, even on small crew documentaries, you still have to really sort of trust and align creatively with style and vision and all of that. So I think, but having that producer director partner to get the project off the ground and to see it to the finishing line is really helpful, because it is challenging to constantly motivate yourself.
Well, because you're always, it's because you're also questioning your own thing, like, yes, well, maybe we should go, oh, maybe we should, like, and then people are infringing on, you know, people will of course give you their opinions of what they think you should be doing.
Yeah. I like having a collaborative partner.
It's another really good question. Jamie, is like, when do you feel you learned the most about filmmaking?
Good question. I think when I was starting out, because I really knew not much, and I had gone to university in Canada, and then I moved to New York and started taking classes at NYU. And then I also started interning with some documentary film production companies, and I started PAing on narrative sets. I don't think I was sleeping much during that time, but I also decided to try to read like all the like how to make an indie film books, which weren't that many out there, but I was like, how do you make a film for like less than $10,000, you know? And so it was a combination of taking classes, doing workshops at DCTV, and I would just watch movies like every single night. I wanted to see as many movies as possible for inspiration. That's why when you said like, what was my inspiration? I was like, oh my gosh, so many. But I think I was just watching every like indie documentary or indie film that came out, like just to see what I liked, to see what I wanted to try, to see what I inspired, and then just constantly being on set. And I joined a collective of filmmakers in Williamsburg. We were called Real Sweet Betty back in the day, and we would all take turns playing different roles. So you could learn to shoot, edit, you know, just every role, because I think it's really helpful for directing and producing to have done cinematography and to have done lighting and to have done editing, and that was important and for me. And making a lot of mistakes, like making a lot of really bad short films. Like I cranked out films.
That is great. That is really smart. And it's because that is, I think it's the iteration. It's like consistently thrown against the wall.
Yeah, it was just like I bought a little camera, and I had my first version of Final Cut Pro, and I just was like, okay, I'm just going to try this and figure it out. And, you know, I think trial by error, and not necessarily advocating that is like an efficient way of learning, but that's what happened for me.
Did you have a mentor at all?
I did have mentors. I think I was very inspired by Laura Hayes. She was a editing professor and documentary film editor at NYU. She was still a professor until she was 97.
Wow.
And she just had story down, and she was just a very vibrant person, and she would always invite, kind of like you're doing with 2020, but invite filmmaker friends to her class and editors to talk about craft with their students. And I was very inspired that she was constantly still working. She would be like, what have you got? Do you want me to look at anything? I've got this new thing. It was like, she just loved making films. And similarly, an editor who I hired and worked with, Milton Ginsberg, who he actually passed away this past year, but he inspired me for that same reason, because he was so driven to just keep making his films. He made documentaries and narrative, and he just always had so much passion for it. And watching films, he would be passionate about his input and passionately continuing to write screenplays. And I was, because sometimes I'm like, am I still really doing this? Like, do this crazy thing.
Am I just making up this career? Am I pretending?
Right, like, exactly. I think it's like and I think, that's the kind of art form of it, whether you're a musician or a painter or a filmmaker. Like, I think you want to be passionate. And I think their passion and their continued passion inspired me, as well as their work. I feel like they both were beautiful filmmakers.
That's really interesting. And were they the type of people you would take your work to or show them your?
Yeah, definitely.
Scripts?
Like they would watch cuts and give me feedback. I mean, I remember Laura once, I brought her this cut of a piece that was about a war journalist, and she's like, so you're telling me she doesn't fall in love? And I was like, no, she doesn't fall in love. She's in a war zone. She's not falling in love. It's not a love story. And she was like, I can't, what about this guy? Like, we can't you fall in love?
She's like the Yenta matchmaker.
Right. It was totally that. And it was like, but again, like, it was just fun to like see which things would come out for her. Like, lose that, cut that. I mean, she was just, could see story.
That's super valuable. That's super valuable, because it is, I think that's one of the hardest things to even when one is passion obsessed, like, will anybody else be? Like, is it making any sense to any, because you're seeing it through your eyes. So how would,
well, they had also, both Laura and Milton have made like films that just blew me away, like just creatively, their boldness and creative decisions to just see their creative visions out, like no matter what. And not just because, like, to your point, not just because of that gumption, but because to me, they made like beautiful films that really broke some creative boundaries that I found very inspiring.
That's exciting. That's very exciting. This is an interesting question. Ulagabe, which is, I definitely pronounced that wrong. What can you point out as number one things that keep you going as a female filmmaker? There's always a little bit of that discussion of being like the slot of the female filmmaker. And I usually don't quite go there but I think it'd be interesting to find out what you think about that.
Yeah. I try to think of myself just as a filmmaker first. But what I was thinking about, because it's the holiday season and there's some like holiday Zooms and things like that. And I think like you and I are in some similar women filmmaking groups. And I think there are challenges as a woman still that I think that women face. And I think that one of the great things that keep me going is some of those groups and knowing that other women are out there. And it's like, instead of having, a knitting bee, we have a like, hey, how's your film going? Let's talk about it, or let's get together, and I think it's like this idea of like women supporting one another is really, and I think that's been happening. I mean, particularly in the film world, and I think even in broader, and I think that that's a really good thing and inspiring thing for women, I think.
Oh, 100%. I do think I think from when I was coming up, I don't think it was literally like there can only be one woman in the room. And well, she got we hired a woman, she's got it, or you're the one, but there's only one, and there's only seem to be one around. and it wasn't like a team sport, or called like, okay, you can support other people and you won't go down in flames, or you won't lose anything by being a support system to other humans. So I think that is much more normalized now a little bit.
Yeah, I think, how do I feel this moment? I think, like I said, I really haven't thought of myself first as a woman filmmaker, and I've just sort of thought like, I'm going to figure out how to make my films kind of no matter what. And I think that's what you have to do. But I think that there, like, it is different than it was when I started, where there are more opportunities. Yeah. So that helps.
That does help.
Yeah.
And you want to, and because it's great there are more, and it's great that there are women that have gone to bat to get to that place. So, you know, it's the opportunities didn't just show up by themselves. There were a lot of pushback about how absurd it was that the numbers were sort of off.
I think, yeah, and I think change happens slowly, and I've certainly been given opportunities by women who know me, probably definitely more so than from men. Like, I think there is that is real as more women become in positions of power, people who, you know, then there is that hiring people who you know, or hiring people who you have access to, or who you connect with. I think that that's part of it.
Yes, I totally understand. What are the most important elements that must be in a documentary film, in your opinion?
I think of documentary film like I think of narrative film or any storytelling. I think important elements is a good question, but I think I always try to think about, I try to look for character, and specifically my documentaries, like character-driven stories. So like, what's the most interesting part of the human experience that's going on here that we can uncover and explore and show? And I think, you know, having stakes, having things that are the character has to go through, and the basic story structure is helpful. But I think if you can get to that core of a feeling and a person, I think that you can create a good film.
100%, 100%. And like nowadays, when you're in between stuff, how do you get yourself like feeling arty and inspired?
That's a good question. I don't think I have like okay, now is my creativity time. Like, I don't so much. It's more like when I sit down to like work on developing something, I think I already have a nugget of it, and then I kind of flesh it out. And I think it just is a matter of like blocking out time to like research or think or write, or, you know, just the time. It's a kind of, you know, fleshing out the concept, I think, is like writing for me. It's like, just, you have to think about what is your story. But in terms of like coming up with ideas, those usually happen like random, like I said, through a conversation with a friend, or something that I'm interested in. A lot of times I think these things are in the zeitgeist, like they come up because, you know, like I'll be reading a book and then I find out like 5 other people are reading the same book. You know, it's like you think that, oh, you're having this unique experience, and then you realize, you know, it's all kind of there. So I try to look for what comes up, what feels the most interesting to me, and what do I want to explore, and what, and then I do, you know, go down the rabbit hole of like, why is this interesting to me, and why is it, where am I in this, you know? Yeah.
Right, because it sounds like you started very strong with social impact, and then it's sort of like that, then you've done it, and then it's sort of like, okay, now what am I going to do? Or do I just keep doing similar vein of stuff?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. In high school, and when I was first starting out, I was very much interested in social. I was also like, I was an activist. I was a big activist with my films, and I was a big activist. And I think I still like to use films to make positive impacts on society. But I also, and also I think there's another part of me that likes to explore other topics. There's some of my films have been about music or theater or, you know, and I think I like to explore topics that are interesting to me, separate from social issue stuff too.
Totally, because I mean, that is the fun of having it as the career. Once we were like, oh, this is my career, that you actually get to experience the world in a vehicle that you would never, as a normal human walking down the street, be able to experience.
Right, that's a good way of saying it. I think how to communicate what you're going through or what is your current experience and how much of yourself is going to be in this thing. Like, yeah, my guess interests change and what comes up for me changes. And then I think I'll always be lifelong interested in, and I think especially with COVID, I've thought a lot about not necessarily injustice, but just like healing in general. I think we've gone through so much loss and illness, and I think we're at a collective place where that's like a general, that's interesting to me, and that's not necessarily from a social justice perspective as much as like this is like we have some broken systems that we need to correct, whether that's like environmental or social. It's interesting to me of like, how do we collectively manage this?
That is, and it's a big topic. Exactly. Yeah, because everybody's looking to heal, but they're just sort of have no, but it's also from the American point of view, it's the insta fix. You know, there's always like, let's just go to the doctor or get the Band-Aid or get the, you know, not the deeper.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly
it.
it. It's like there's a lot. I think that there's a lot there that's interesting to me that's been coming up, and I think it's in the collective. And I think that might not look like a social justice film or a social justice project, but I'm exploring that right now.
That is really cool. So we are coming to our time of our finish. Is there can people find you places or like watch your work some places, or not troll you, but like to keep up with you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a website that's just my name, trishdalton.com, where there's like links to my films where you can find them, and and links to my social sites. Just I'm on Instagram as Trish Films is my hashtag, I guess, or whatever it's called. My oh yeah,
awesome. Yep, exactly. Thank you. So
yeah,
follow you there, and yeah, this is amazing. You're just so inspiring, and it was so great to have you on today. And this, guys, this is our last 2020 of the season, so we're so happy to have Trish with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice to be here, and always fun to talk with you.
I know, it's so great. And everybody be healthy and happy and have a wonderful holiday. And we'll see you guys later. Bye.